One, the texture. So if you see the texture here, and you'll actually see, in the next video that's about to come up. Shea butter has a very tough texture. You have to rub it out till it gets into your skin, right? And then castor oil is oil, so it has a very liquid texture where, if you just need a little bit, if you use too much, it's gonna be like, a lot of oil. So essentially I found that after, trying to make body butter and different oils and stuff like that, when you take the shea butter and you take the castor oil and you put it together, it creates, when it's blended together and finally cools down, it creates a texture like the shea butter when it was a solid, but because of the castor oil, it makes it soft into like a cream, right? And that is essentially why I like this combination of shea butter and castor oil. So now I'm going to show you how to make it. So as you can see right here, I have some shea butter in the 16-ounce teacup, and I also have some castor oil that's right below it. The first thing you do is put the shea butter into a glass jar like this, because what we will be doing is putting that glass jar in a pot of water that will be on a stove, and that will help the shea butter to melt into a liquid base form. It doesn't really matter the type of shea butter you get. I know there's yellow shea butter and like white shea butter. For me, the shea butter I have is from a friend that gets it from Ghana in bulk, and then I buy from him. It's group economics. I'm not too picky about, these things. Now, the next thing you're gonna do is pour some castor oil in the jar, but enough to where the bottom of the jar is filled up so that it can start to heat up and help the shea butter melt. Now I put the glass jar in a pot of water and I put it on the stove so it can get heated up. Usually I have the water already warmed up, not boiling, but warm enough where it can essentially start to melt the shea butter faster. Now this video that you're seeing is sped up, so this process took about 20 minutes. As you can see, the shea butter begins to take on a liquid form, and I just keep it there. I take a fork and I begin to stir it up, and this is to help the shea butter melt faster because the chunks can be pretty tough. So the fork helps to grab the shea butter that's tough and move it around so that it can melt faster. Continue to pour castor oil in every time a good amount of shea butter melts so that they can infuse together. And finally, I use the fork to hold the chunks against the glass once the glass is heated up, because now the glass itself can be used to melt the rest of the shea butter into full liquid form. Now, as you can see here, this is shea butter and castor oil after it's been on the stove and finally melted into a liquid base. I continue to stir it up with a fork just so it can really get together. And even in this form, it's still great to use. In this liquid form, still good for skin, even can be used on the hair. However, what will happen over time is that it will begin to cool. And as you saw in the beginning of the video, the form it takes happens when it cools, due to the fact that when shea butter cools, it becomes a solid. So I pour some of that liquid into my personal jar, and this personal jar will be going in the fridge because ain't nobody got time to wait for it to cool by room temperature. The bigger jar I leave for room temperature just for this video purpose, but overall you want to, once it cools, everything is, that's pretty much it. Like once it cools. Now, as you can see here, this is what it looks like when it's cool. And as you can see, the bigger jar now is what it looked like as it's slowly cooling by room temperature. So you can slowly see that the liquid is taking on a solid form slowly. But for the smaller jar, as you can see, it's taking on that form quicker because I put it in the fridge. And when you take a bit of it, that texture, that nice soft texture, that when you rub it in your hands, it absorbs straight into the skin. And that's why, as I shared, I love combining shea butter with castor oil. Sometimes when you make shea butter, if you mix it with things like, for example, coconut oil, it will still take on a very hard texture when it cools off, and it requires a lot of, friction to melt. But with the castor oil, it's that simple. And this is what the regular jar looks like now, cooled after room temperature. So whenever I want more, especially for making it a product that you can find on my website, I essentially warm it up and transfer it into